But perhaps the most profound issue surrounding my receipt of this prize is the fact that I am the Commander-in-Chief of a military, of a nation, in the midst of two wars. One of these wars is winding down.
One of these wars winding down. The other one, not so much. And the other one, they didn't even talk about that one. The president today went into quite a bit of detail about the war in Afghanistan, describing it in terms of the just war doctrine and leaving out entirely the war that we're waging now in Pakistan. Leaving it out because American officials still aren't talking about it out loud, even though, even in today's news, there's plenty of evidence that America's third and secret war is expanding. Some dramatic new reporting today on this secret war that we're suddenly learning more about each day, it seems. Early in our understanding of the secret war in Pakistan, all we really knew, courtesy of then Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, was that the CIA was waging it, at least somewhat.
The overwhelming bulk of all activity in Afghanistan since the first U.S. forces went in have been basically under the control of the Central Command. An exception has been the armed predators, which are CIA operated.
The armed predators. That's about all we knew about the drone operations back in 2002. It wasn't until August of this year, 7 years later, that the New York Times came out with a bombshell on the drone operation. The military contractor, formerly known as Blackwater, was also involved in the CIA's Predator drone program, assembling and loading missiles onto these armed, unmanned aerial vehicles. So, as of this summer, we knew the Pakistan drone war was a joint CIA Blackwater effort, but then just last month there was another major development from the nation's Jeremy Scahill. Contrary to what we'd believed to be true for years, Scahill reported that the U.S. military was in fact involved in the drone strikes in the secret war inside Pakistan. A huge development that Scahill was kind enough to flesh out here on this show. Okay, so this is a huge deal because in terms of learning about what we're doing with the drones, what we've been able to say up until this point is, yeah, the military uses drones. The military uses drones in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. They use them for surveillance. They use them sometimes for bombing. If there are drone attacks in Pakistan, those are not U.S. military. That's the CIA. That's why we never comment on them. You're saying that's not true. It's contractors, but they are also working with the U.S. military, secret elements of the U.S. military.
I have multiple sources on this, including a very well-placed military intelligence source, and part of the reason why the military intelligence source is speaking to me is because he is offended at the idea that you have these operations happening outside of the military chain of command and with no oversight from the Congress, and says that some of the highest civilian casualty attacks from the drones are not in fact CIA attacks, but are military attacks because, as he put it, they simply don't care. There's no oversight. If there's one bad guy in a building and 34 civilians, 35 people are going to die.
That was Jeremy Scahill speaking on this show recently about his reporting on Pakistan. And now today, thanks to brand new reporting from our next guest, we're learning that not only is it the CIA and Blackwater and the secret joint special operations part of the U.S. military, in fact, the U.S. Air Force is helping wage the secret war in Pakistan, which means this war is starting to seem like it's not going to be so secret anymore. Joining us now is Noah Shachtman. He's contributing editor for Wired magazine. He's editor of Wired.com's Danger Room blog, where he's reporting new details on the drone war today. Noah, I am a big fan of Danger Room. Thanks very much for coming in.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Let me ask you first if I've done okay with the context here. As far as I understand it, nobody else had reported before you today that the unsecret U.S. military, the actual U.S. Air Force, is flying drone strikes in Pakistan. Is that right?
Yeah, I think this is the first time. I was over the summer at a clandestine base in Southwest Asia. I'm not allowed to say where, but you can find it on Google.
I think I found it on Google today.
Okay. And there's a big screen in the middle of this warehouse that they've turned into the operations center for the whole air war from Afghanistan to Iraq. And it turns out on the big screen, there was also a bunch of drones flying over Pakistan, too. And it even said on the screen, pilots had to give a certain amount of notice before they entered into Pakistani airspace.
So this is a U.S. military-operated facility. These drones are being certainly monitored from this facility. Are U.S. military I know they call them pilots. It's a little bit weird to call them pilots. U.S. military pilots operating these drones on these bombing raids in Pakistan.
I don't know if they're operating on the bombing raids, but I do know that they are flying missions over Pakistan. They're doing it in conjunction with the Pakistani military. I think a lot of those big offensives by the Pakistani military over the last few months, I think have probably had some U.S. drone help. And I know that they're allowed to chase in hot pursuit a militant from the Afghan side to the Pakistani side of the border. And then they also seem to be running these other missions.
Other missions, which are they're still not talking about them, but they at least let you report that they exist.
Right, and that's multiple people. And by the way, you showed that clip of Donald Rumsfeld back in 2002. Already back then, there were military drones flying over Pakistan. I talked to a senior U.S. military official who talked about, hey, back then, oh yeah, I used to talk to the head of the Pakistani Air Force all the time, and we used to work this stuff out.
Why is it, at least, what can you tell about why it is that the U.S. military and U.S. authorities, broadly speaking, have been very happy for us to think that it's just the CIA operating these drones in Pakistan, in effect waging our war in Pakistan, and because it's the CIA, they won't talk about it? Why have they been happy to let that impression stand if our military has been involved all along?
Because if it's CIA secret squirrel, then there's not a lot of oversight. You don't have to ask a lot of questions. And remember that on the Afghan side of the border, the air war is very tightly regulated, right?
Yes.
There are all these rules about when you can drop a bomb and when you can't drop a bomb. I was with a group of Marines in Afghanistan over the summer, and they spent 36 hours under fire before they got permission to drop bombs on the guys that were shooting them, right? But then on the Pakistan side of the border, you hear about all these drone strikes, and there's a dozen dead, 2 dozen dead, 3 dozen dead, 4 dozen dead. Well, you don't get 4 dozen dead in an air attack if it's tightly regulated.
So if it makes the reason that it is so tightly regulated on the Afghan side of the border is because of American strategy. We're trying to reduce, if not eliminate, civilian casualties as part of this whole counterinsurgency doctrine. If that strategy makes sense on the Afghan side of the border, why is the same strategy not being used on the Pakistani side of the border?
Awesome question.
With no answer as of yet.
I think there's a little bit of an answer. Okay, first of all, Pakistan does not want to advertise that it's got large numbers or any numbers of U.S. forces there on Pakistani soil. So they want to keep it as secret squirrel as possible, and they want to talk about the drones, not about anything else going on there. So I think that that's part of it. And then, yeah, there are questions about why counterinsurgency 101 works on one side of the border and then not on the other.
And the big question for me, just for American democracy, is what it means to have a war that we choose not to talk about and call secret, even though we all know that it's going on. And I think that's a political question that we now have more ammunition to pursue because of your reporting. Noah Shachtman, the editor of Wired.com's Danger Room blog, which is required reading for all of the staff on this show.
Awesome.
Thanks very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.